I've been reading War and Peace, and the section came up that I just wanted to make a video about because it's one of my favourite scenes in the whole book, and it reminded me of when I was a student back in 1998 and I was writing this, my dissertation for my undergraduate degree at St Andrews, 1998, for Professor Hippisley, and it's a comparison of the 1968 movie version of War and Peace by Sergei Bondarchuk, comparing it with the novel and the structure and all of that. And when I read this section here about Prince Andrey going to visit Count Rostov, and he goes past an oak tree and he has some inner monologue going on about the oak tree, and the scene in the movie is beautifully done. So I'm going to read it out and I'm going to show you the movie as well, just to show you how these two different media portray this amazing scene that resonates with me really well. And obviously I was a much younger man back then. 1998 wasn't yesterday, but I was intrigued to note that that was the scene that I'd picked out, and as I was reading it today, it was like, yeah, I get why I did that. And although I've now got 30 more years of life experience, well, just under 30 more years, I suppose in a sense it resonates with me now even more than it did back then. So here we go. This is from Volume 2, Part 3, Chapter 1. So if you're reading it now and you don't want spoilers, I don't think this is spoilery as such. It's really more philosophical than plot. But anyway, here we go. There at the roadside stood an oak tree. It must have been 10 times older than the birch trees that made up the wood, 10 times as thick and twice the height of any of them. That tree was enormous. It would have taken 2 men to join hands round its girth, with branches broken off it ages ago and its old cracked bark all scarred and broken. There it stood among the beaming birches. That's a typo. There it stood among the beaming birches, with its great gnarled hands and fingers sprawling out awkwardly and unevenly, a truculent, sneering monster. He alone refused to submit to the charms of spring. He would not countenance either springtime or sunshine. Springtime, love and happiness, this tree seemed to be saying. Aren't you fed up with it all? This stupid, senseless sham. It never changes, this same old trick. There is no springtime, sunshine or happiness. Just look at those dead fir trees sitting there where they've been brought down. Always the same, every one of them. And look at me, sticking out broken, peeling fingers wherever they care to grow, out of my back, out of my sides. That's how they've grown, and that's how I am. And I don't believe in any of your hopes and shams. Prince Andrey drove on through the forest, glancing back several times at the oak tree, as if he was expecting it to do something. Flowers and grass grew underneath it, but it just stood there among them, an ugly, awkward thing, stock still and scowling. He's right, that tree, 1,000 times right, mused the prince. Other people, young people, they can keep that sham going. But he and I know what life is. Our lives are over and done with. The tree had stirred up a host of new ideas in the prince's soul which held no hope, though their bitterness was sweet. On the journey there, he seemed to have reconsidered his entire life and come right back to his first conclusion, which was as reassuring as it was devoid of hope. That he needn't bother with anything new. All he had to do was live out his life without doing any harm, free from worry and any kind of desire. So, that's the first time that the prince passes by the old oak tree. So let's have a look at the movie version.
Ваше сиятельство. Легко как.
Что?
Легко, ваше сиятельство.
Что он говорит? Да, в весне верно. То зелено, все уже, как скоро. И береза, и черемуха, и ольха уж начинает. А дуб и незаметно. Да, вот он, дуб.
Весна. И любовь. И счастье. И как не надоест вам все один и тот же глупый, бессмысленный обман. Все одно и то же, и все обман. Нет ни весны, ни солнца, ни счастья. Не верю вашим надеждам и обманам.
Да, он прав. 1000 раз прав этот дуб. Пускай другие, молодые, вновь поддаются на этот обман. А мы знаем жизнь. Наша жизнь кончена. Надо доживать свою жизнь, не делая зла, не тревожась и ничего не желая.
Right, there we go. Beautifully portrayed, I think. The way the music builds up and we get the darkness and, yeah, delightful, delightful scene. But it cheers up a bit and we're going to get to that. Right, and now he's passing by the fields, having just left the old oak tree behind. And it says, "Spring was now at its hottest. The woodland was clothed in green and everywhere was dusty and so hot that if you drove past any water, you felt like going in for a swim. Prince Andrey was in a miserable mood as he drove up the avenue towards the Rostov's house at Otradnaye, mentally running through the bits of business that he would want to raise with the marshal. Through the trees on the right, he heard happy female voices, and then he watched as a small crowd of young girls ran across his path. Out in front, dashing towards the coach, came a black-haired, black-eyed girl, quite remarkably slender in her yellow print dress, with a white handkerchief on her head and stray locks of loose hair tumbling out of it. She was calling out, but once she saw a stranger, she ran back, laughing, without a glance in his direction. For some reason, Prince Andrey felt a sudden pang. It was such a lovely day with sunshine and happiness on every hand, and here was this pretty slip of a girl who was oblivious to his existence and cared even less about it, and she was so pleased and happy with her own special life. A silly life, he had no doubt, but one that was merry and happy. What is she so glad about? What's in her mind? Not army regulations, not the Ryazan peasants and the rent they'll have to pay. What is in her mind, and why is she so happy? Prince Andrey couldn't help wondering. So, this is a nice scene in the movie. Let's take a look. Yellow print dress, white handkerchief. Attention to detail. Right, so Prince Andrey has been smitten. We get a scene that follows that one where he gets to hear Natasha singing for the first time, and she doesn't know he's listening. He's standing at the window looking out over a moonlit scene, and so is Natasha. She's like, this is such a gorgeous scene, and then she starts to sing with her sister. He overhears and he's like, oh, amazing. He leaves the next morning, and then he comes back again in June. So his first time passing was probably April, May. Now we're into June, summer's in full swing, and we get this scene. It was early June when, on his return, he drove once again into the birchwood where the gnarled oak tree had made such a strangely indelible impression on him. That oak tree, it was somewhere near here in the forest. There was such an affinity between us, he thought. But where was it? As he wondered, he glanced across, left, and unconsciously, without recognising it, began to admire the very tree that he was looking for. The old oak was completely transformed, now spreading out a canopy of lush, dark foliage and stirring gently as it wallowed in the evening sunshine. No trace now of the gnarled fingers, the scars, the old sadness and misgivings. Succulent young leaves with no twigs had burst straight through the hard bark of 100 years. It was almost incredible that this old fellow should have grown them. Ah, yes, that's the one, thought the prince, spontaneously overwhelmed by one of those surges of delight and renewal that belong to springtime. All the best times of his life came together sharply in his memory. The lofty sky at Austerlitz. I won't read the next bit, it's a spoiler. Pierre on the ferry, and that young girl who had been so enthralled by the night's beauty, the night itself and the moon. Suddenly he remembered it all. No, life isn't over at 31, was his instant, final and irrevocable conclusion. It is not enough for me to know what is going on inside me. Everybody must know about it. Pierre and that girl who wanted to fly up into the sky, they must all get to know me. My life must be lived for me, but also for other people. They mustn't live like that girl, separated from me. My life must be reflected in them, and they must live along with me, all of us together. And then we jump forward to another bit of highlighted where he says, it now seemed absolutely clear that all his life experience would count for nothing if he failed to make practical use of it by starting to lead an active life again. Right, let's take a look at the scene in the movie.
Да, здесь, в этом лесу, был этот дуб, с которым мы были согласны. Да где он? Да это тот самый дуб.
Надо верить, что живем не нынче только на этом клочке земли, а жили и будем жить вечно во всем.
That's what Pierre says to him on the ferry.
Нет, жизнь не кончена в 31 год. Мало того, что я знаю все то, что есть во мне. Надо, чтобы и все знали это. И Пьер, и эта девочка, которая хотела улететь в небо. Надо, чтобы все знали меня. Чтобы не для одного меня шла моя жизнь. Чтобы на всех она отражалась. И чтобы все они жили со мною вместе.
So it's quite a scene, isn't it? It's quite a transformation. We get him feeling that his life is over as he passes by the old oak tree. When it has no leaves, it's just gnarled old branches, fingers, sticking up into the sky, and he feels that all he wants to do is sit at home at his estate and just not engage with the world anymore. He's done. I think the Austerlitz war, where he was wounded, has made its mark on him, and he's done. But then he meets Natasha for the first time. Although they haven't met, he gets to see her, to hear her singing. He gets the moonlit scene, and then he comes back and he sees the oak tree again. So that's when the transformation happens, and it's so beautifully portrayed. As he passes by the oak tree the first time his life is over, he gets to hear Natasha. Then he passes the oak tree again, and he feels reborn, like his life is beginning, and that he wants to share his life experience and to engage in an active life once again. It's quite relatable. For me, it's relatable. And what's interesting is that for 26-year-old me, 26 years ago, when I wrote this dissertation, it stood out to me then as well. Now, was I at that point passing the oak tree with no leaves, or the oak tree with leaves? Had I met Natasha when I wrote this, or had I not? It's an interesting question, and I'm not sure what the answer is. But what I am excited for is that at the age I am now, at 52, I can read this book and I can connect with my old self, my younger self, and I can start to imagine what was going on in my life. I mean, I can remember, of course, there's lots of stuff I remember about then, but my sensibilities and my thoughts and my feelings, yeah, it's good to revisit that. And in this dissertation, I do have a whole scene that I've written about that particular scene in the book, which is just remarkable. And my hope is that by sharing this kind of content on YouTube, that, hang on, my phone's ringing. My hope is that it will inspire some of you to pick the book up, because, we often think that classic 19th century literature, especially when it can hold the door open, is intimidating and difficult, and it's not. It's beautiful and inspiring and life-affirming and relatable, and that's what's just so beautiful about it, So I hope you enjoyed this. If you'd like me to do more of this kind of thing, I'd be well up for that, because what's interesting to me is that this project, when I wrote this dissertation in 1998, didn't allow me to do such things as share videos and talk about them from the movie. That just wouldn't have been possible in 1998. And now that Mosfilm has put the full feature film up on their YouTube channel and remastered it as well, so it's a really good opportunity for me to revisit what I did here, which is to compare the film and the book in a kind of 26-year-old rudimentary way. And I did write it in Russian as well, which hampered to some extent my creativity. But I did pass. I got a 2-1. This was my final year at St Andrews, my last big project before graduation. So it worked, and what a delight now to be revisiting that with all the life experience that I've gained since then. The growth, the trials, the tribulations, the relationships, the life, And it's interesting to see how it still relates, and I'm sure always will. That's the great thing about classic literature. It never stops becoming relatable, and the way that we relate to it changes as we change, which is why it's worth revisiting and revisiting again. So look out for more of this. I'm sure there'll be more to come, because I love doing it. So thanks for watching. See you in the next one.